Hi everyone, here's what's bothering me today. This was originally the video I was going to do on Friday, but then a piece in the article that I'm mostly using as the base for this reminded me, oh yeah, household debt and that old chestnut and why it's terrible and why banks need to shut up about it. So that's what happened. But again, I do want to talk about what's going on in South Korea and also crucially, why our media is not giving it the coverage that it absolutely deserves to have. This, I guess, also touches on another video that I did a long time ago, which was about the general strike, for lack of a better term, that was going on in India. It was really more like mass strikes and mass unrest amongst Indian farmers protesting against just government dickery. And it was, and I'm pretty sure still is, the largest general strike in history. And yet the media in much of the West barely touched on it, if at all. And by the way, those strikes are still ongoing. It is still happening. Here, like nearly a year later, it continues. And yet we still don't hear much about it. But today's focus is on South Korea and what's recently happened there and what is slated for January 2022. So on October 20th, at least 500,000 workers in South Korea from across the construction, transportation, service, and other sectors walked off their jobs in a one-day general strike. Lots of people have probably seen some of the rather interesting and surreal pictures from South Korea showing people in like Squid Game costumes at the protests. Yo, real talk, if Squid Game is the spark that actually lights a Korean revolution. But anyway, it was a one-day general strike, which, okay, but still solid, good stuff. And what follows in the aftermath are just continuing protests and mass demonstrations, if you want to call it that, in urban centers and out in the rural areas as well. The idea is that this would all culminate in a national all-people's mobilization in January of 2022. The main organizer of all this is the Korean Confederation of Trade Unions. The KCTU is actually Korea's largest labor union umbrella with over 1 million members, so it's pretty significant. And so they're working with a lot of the downtrodden in Korea. So we're talking the urban poor, the rural poor, farm workers, irregular job workers, contract workers, the people basically we see glimpses of and are meant to identify with in Squid Game. And apparently the KCTU has 15 demands that can, as this article points up, broadly be categorized into 3 areas. Number 1, abolish irregular work, part-time, temporary, or contract labor with little or no benefits, and extend labor protections to all workers. Number 2, give workers power in economic restructuring decisions during times of crisis. Number 3, nationalize key industries and socialize basic services like education and housing. Hell yeah, I like these. These are all things that need to also happen in every other corner of the West. Oh, right. That's why the media isn't talking about it, because they are bought and paid for by corporations and businesses that love using these things that this very strike is meant to bring attention to and break down with something far better. That's why the media isn't saying anything about the Korean general strike and the continuing mass demonstrations and the ultimate culmination that will hopefully happen in January. It is so frustrating, right, to see that the media, which keeps telling us all the time, we're who you should trust, and you know, we give you the news and just straight facts, and it's everything you need to know, when really there should be an asterisk beside it that says everything that our corporate overlords allow us to let you know about. And unfortunately, because of that, that also leads to a lot of people buying into conspiracy theories and misinformation, and the wrong kind of don't trust the media, but that's a subject for another time. South Korea went on a massive one-day general strike and is still planning events between now and January, several months of making their voices heard and putting pressure on government and business to improve the material conditions for the working Korean. And when you find out about how bad things are in Korea, yeah, it kind of makes sense why this is happening. Today, South Korea ranks 3rd in highest annual working hours, and as of 2015, it was 3rd in workplace deaths among member countries of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Over 40% of all workers are considered irregular workers. As in the US, many of these irregular workers labor in the gig economy, beholden to tech giants' apps. And this is also made worse by something that's not exactly entirely unique to Korea, but it is something that they have a term for. Much of Korean economy and society are dominated by corporate conglomerates, and apologies to any and all Korean speakers. I know I'm no doubt butchering this word, but I'm gonna give it a shot anyway. Chaebol. And these conglomerates run everything from like broadband, restaurants, TV, obviously the main centers of manufacturing. For example, this piece from the article actually illustrates how much power the chaebols have. Despite an ostensible democratic transition in the late 1980s, the South Korean people have no ownership of South Korea's economy. The average household's debt amounts to almost double their annual income. 64 chaebols claim 84% of the GDP, yet provide only 10% of jobs. In fact, the average South Korean has less say in government than U.S. corporations, which have power under the 2007 U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement to legally contest laws they find unfavorable. So corporate conglomerates, again, a majority of them, 64%, get 84% of Korea's GDP, yet somehow provide only 10% of jobs in South Korea. How the hell does that work? It's also made even worse when you realize that the top 10% of earners claimed 45% of total income in 2016. Real estate speculation has led to a housing crisis. Where have I heard that story before? And privatization in education and healthcare are expanding disparities. Korea, no, don't copy America in the worst ways. What are you doing? And again, I don't want to break down the whole article because it's long, it's decent, it's worth a read. I just kind of want to hit the main points of how and why it led to this terrible inequality. So to broadly sum up, in the wake of the Korean War, South Korea was actually not really that democratic. It had numerous dictatorships that were propped up by the US, basically because, oh no, domino theory, and otherwise, then Japan's vulnerable, and no, we can't have that. We must occupy half of the Korean peninsula. But in terms of the modern day, it again can be traced to neoliberal economics implemented in the 1980s. This is during the dictatorship of someone, and again, no doubt butchering this pronunciation, Chun Do-hwan. And apparently they were the one who decided that South Korea needed to become a exploitative economy as per neoliberal economics. So he stripped away protectionist policies, opened up Korea to the international market, which in a way was briefly good because it allowed for $100 billion of loans to just flood into the country. But then there was an acute economic crisis in Asia in 1997. So all that foreign capital that came in over the course of like nearly 20 years suddenly left. South Korea still wanting to, oh geez, we got to take care of things. We got a standard to maintain. They then went to the IMF. The IMF provided loans, but the IMF loan came with strings attached. Structural adjustment policies dismantled hard-won worker protections, public corporations were privatized, and domestic markets were pried open for foreign capital, which returned to devour cheap Korean assets. By 2004, up to 44% of South Korea's total stock market capitalization was owned by foreigners, mostly from the US, the EU, and Japan. And again, in the wake of the 1997 crisis, you had like mass layoffs. This is where irregular work and contract work really took off in South Korea. Poverty rate doubled, like just all the bad things that, again, we can so clearly see with the adoption of neoliberal economics. By the way, John the Duncan has a really great video on neoliberalism. Actually has a few. Just go watch his videos. They're solid. And then all of these inequalities were made acutely worse and just really deeply felt because of COVID-19. And so after like 20 plus years of abuse and neglect and irregular work and the stripping away of worker protections and making life all the more difficult for your average working Korean, while their bankers and their big corporate conglomerates rake in money, yet provide very few actual jobs for Koreans in Korea. Something's gotta give, and the Korean people are rightly tired of it. And if during any of what I said and listed you felt, oh geez, wow, are we talking about Korea? Or are we talking about America, Canada, Britain, Australia, Germany, Spain, Argentina, etc.? Like, yeah, this is kind of a universal problem because of terrible neoliberal economics. Oh my God. But yeah, this is exactly why the media here in the West doesn't want us learning about all this and paying attention to South Korea and the general strike and the mass demonstrations and protests. Because if they actually did their job and accurately reported on that and in depth and also explained, hey, here's what's happening in Korea and why it's happening and how it got to this point, that wouldn't be good, because that would really piss off our governments and our corporate masters here, because they don't want us to realize, oh, the story of abuse and neoliberal terribleness is universal around the world. The South Korean struggle is my struggle. They're dealing with the same things I'm dealing with. And that's what they do not want. They do not want us to show solidarity and kindness and caring with each other. And they certainly don't want us to hear about all the demands of, hey, nationalize certain industries, actually implement worker protections to help the people you claim to be supporting and represent. So with that said, solidarity with the people of Korea, but it is really beyond bothersome. It is actually infuriating that our media is not saying anything about this, and we all unfortunately know the reasons why. The plight of workers in South Korea is basically identical to your average working class American, Canadian, Australian, Brit. Like, the list goes on, and it's just so plain and obvious here for us to see. And yet the people who are supposed to tell us about these things seem uniquely disinterested in doing so, because it's the same corporate overlords that are exploiting in the same exact ways. And that is absolutely what's bothering me today.